The short talk is about a West Australian company that was formed here in Perth back in 1977 by 4 enthusiastic men who contributed a grand outlay of $500 each to float the enterprise. The company was Aerodata, which morphed into World Geoscience Corporation, progressing to become the world leader in the chosen field of airborne geophysical surveys. What does an airborne geophysical survey do? How do they do it? And what process? Is it invasive or passive? What methods do they employ to get their results? Before we get too far into this brief talk, I will try to explain some of the technical aspects of airborne geophysical surveys in simple layman terms. If you look at the Petroleum Gazette there, it talks about explorers reach new heights by flying low. And that's what airborne geophysical surveys were. They flew low. I'm sure you're aware about MAD aircraft, or magnetic anomaly detector aircraft, such as the Lockheed P3 Orion, operated by the RAAF and many countries in the world. One of the Orion's missions is to seek ferrous metal of the submarines as they cruise below the water in hostile territories. Simply put, they carry a magnetometer, which is a detector about the size of a coffee jar, in the fiberglass stinger in the tail of the aircraft. The stinger is a simple method of placing the magnetometer far from ferrous metals and electric motors in the aircraft as practicable. A magnetometer, or magnetic sensor, is an instrument that measures magnetism, either the magnetism of a magnetic material or the direction, strength and relative change of magnetic strength of the ore body. A compass is a simple type of magnetometer, one that measures the direction of ambient magnetic field. The method detects, and geophysicists can then analyse, then identify the various typical minerals that are deep below the surface of the Earth. This is one of the typical MAD aircraft. It's a Cessna 206, and this is a Shrike Commander, and you can see the stinger out the back with the magnetometer extreme right at the end. That was the short Skyvan we operated, World Geoscience, and you can see the stinger protruding out the back, and then you can see a helicopter with a stinger out the front. That's one of the PBYs that the Catalina EXG used to have the cable. And that's another one, the electronic magnetism. That's a Trislander that World Geoscience operated. You can see the cable going from wings to the tail. And that is one of the new innovations, a Squirrel helicopter. And you'll see it's got a clothes hoist hanging from the bottom of the aeroplane, and that is what generates the square wave passive current into the Earth. That is the generator that's on the helicopter that provides the power to the aircraft and the coil as it flies along. This enables the BHPs and the Rio Tintas type miners to locate hidden ore bodies without a single exploration hole being dug. There are other non-invasive detecting methods for detecting the Earth's magnetic field, influencing by all types of minerals and oils below the surface of the Earth's crust and sea surface. A MAD, as you know, magnetic anomaly detector profile, usually means flying at a precise, determined course at between 30 and 60 metres above the ground, which can be very difficult, bearing in mind low-level turbulence and high ambient temperatures experienced down in the weeds. Other techniques employ electromagnetic transmissions, which require the aircraft to be equipped with a heavy cable from the nose to the wingtip to the tail, like a Flying Hills clothes hoist. This shows you some of the SAMs, or the surveys World Geoscience did. That was in Louisiana, and that was one carried out north of Scotland, Norway, and out in the sea. Now this is the electronics magnetics diagram, how it works. The aircraft flies with a loop, and it generates a square wave pulse that's passively passed to the Earth, and from the coil to the aircraft as it traverses the line. The return analysis of the aircraft's geological structure is recovered by a bomb-like bird towing in space behind the aircraft about 40 metres above the ground. You can see the cable. Thanks, Brian. and a bird there. I'll relate an interesting story later about exploration in Zambia, used with a Skyvan using a towed bomb, which resulted in a win for all parties. Another utilised method was measuring radiometrics, was an artificially grown crystal pack composed of a suitcase-sized sodium iodide which measures potassium, uranium. These crystal packs were traditionally 16 litres in size, and Airborne Geophysics used two weighing about 100 kilos to pick up the gamma ray spectra of the aircraft as it overflies a selected area. Then in the early 1991, World Geoscience started using an advanced process called Airborne Laser Fluorescencer installed in Skyvan aircraft. Now the ALF, or the ALF, would fly above the sea about 30 metres and directed a laser beam vertically down to detect if there's a prospect of oil below the surface. Oil seepage fluoresces on the sea and can be analysed from the computer equipment carried on board. And this process was used extensively in the North Sea of Scotland, Shetland Island, Norway and throughout Southeast Asia. Just as a side, when we were demonstrating, proving this, we went out in Coburn Sound, and Tony, his brother, went out and he had about 6 buckets of oil. And he dropped one over the side of the tinny, and the aircraft flew over. He knew what oil it was, and the aircraft flew over. The ALF identified the oil, and he threw the second bucket over the side, not quite a bucket, but enough to identify, and they could identify each sample of oil that was put over into Coburn Sound. Another type we used the airborne laser fluorescencer was looking for the Sydney out off Carnarvon. We had a brainwave to go out and see, because even the Sydney still seeps oil to the surface of the sea. And if we could identify where the oil seepage was, we could identify where the Sydney was. But that didn't come to any fruition, unfortunately. Now, let me establish a timeline of who I am and how did I get a place in the story. My name is Bevan Marshall, and back in the last century, I was an airworthiness inspector with the Dark Empire, CASA. In those days, it was an honourable profession, and our job was to assist the aviation industry to be compliant with the onerous regulations that CAA or CASA wrote. Each inspector was assigned to a group of aviation companies, so there was a line of traceability and credibility from CASA to supply the service to the aviation industry. Isn't it wonderful how we've morphed? One of my assigned companies was World Geoscience Corporation, who operated a fleet of aircraft, about 15 aircraft, utilising geological survey duties for various mining companies in all regions from the world. The operations manager was Mr. Tony McCambridge, a pilot of the line who was one of the contact persons with World Geoscience. He's here today to keep me honest. That's Tony McCambridge in the bow tie on the left there. The guy in the centre was a wonderful man called Warren Cush. He was our chief pilot, and unfortunately Warren, he succumbed to cancer, and finally he ferried an aeroplane back from UK at great expense to his health and managed to get back, and shortly after that he went into remission. He died. When I joined World Geoscience in the 90s, they were a multi-million-dollar company, and their operations covered Australia, North and South America, Canada, India, PNG, UK and Southeast Asia. This is the phone list from World Geoscience. It just shows you how big we got. I left CASA hoping to be involved with a vibrant company to inject a little travel and excitement into my life. What an understatement that turned out to be. One of their founders, Pat Canine, who was among the 3 enterprising entrepreneurial colleagues that formed the company called Aerodata in 1977, with a borrowed aircraft and equipment. As I said at the beginning, each member invested a massive capital of $500 to float the company. Their first job was here in the West for Newmont in 1978, using 2 borrowed Cessna 206 aircraft from Mike McCauley, who was one of the initial 4 investors. These aircraft surveyed most of Australia using wingtip magnetometer sensors You can see the wingtip out there on the port wing, like a football stuck on the end. In lieu of the later designed tail string installations, which have now become world renowned, Mike McCauley decided to leave the fold and take his 2 Cessna 206 workhorses with him. So this forced the fledgling company to lash out and purchase a brand new Cessna 206 workhorse for the grand total of $60,000. Incidentally, this aircraft went on to fly at low level and geophysical surveys, which was the highest utilised Cessna 206 in the world. Aerodata went public in 1984 and World Geoscience was formed as a subsidiary company, but the financial crisis of 1987 stopped World Geoscience from being listed. A great deal of ongoing airworthiness was attributed to the high standard of maintenance. That's payday out there in the field. We're using the office of the tail of the Cessna 206. And there's the aircraft with the Cessna 206 that started the work. A great deal of the ongoing airworthiness was attributed to the exceptionally high standard of maintenance from Mr. Graeme Woolcock, the chief engineer, and his staff here at James Bond Airport. That's Graeme with the moustache on the left. And that was at Pat Canine's when he retired. World Geoscience had a CASA certificate of approval to maintain their aircraft, coupled with the engine and propeller overhaul facilities located here in Perth, which enabled them to adhere to very high standards required to fly survey at low level. Airborne geophysical survey flying is extremely exacting, and the flying process over deserts and jungles at low altitudes, around 30 to 60 metres, so there have been a number of serious accidents resulting in loss of life. Many of the company's worldwide competitors experienced these tragic events, which led to Pat Canine, his enterprising entrepreneurial brain, to institute an international organisation called IAGSA, the International Airborne Geophysical Safety Association, 20 years later. That's the inaugural meeting we had in Toronto. We formed a safety committee with all the operators, all the competitors, and we used to liaise with all the competitors, and it was harmonious. It was great. Pat was honoured with a Lifetime Achievement Award from IAGSA in 2017 for his catalytic action in forming IAGSA. I had the unfortunate task as a safety officer of World Geoscience to be involved in a number of investigations which led, at least 4 of them, which led to tragic events which led to loss of life. One of these epitomises the lack of technical experience on the part of the search parties. Happened back in 1994 when I had just joined World Geoscience as safety officer. The World Geoscience Cessna 206 Kilo Foxtrot was transiting Spencer Gulf in South Australia at 500 feet when the engine quit. The reason was never established. The young pilot, accompanied by the operator of the survey equipment, immediately gave a mayday call, engine failure, 45 south of Wyala, ditching in the Gulf. The call was received by the authorities and immediately initiated a rescue survey with helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. As you old flyers here will be aware, 45 south in aviation parlance means 45 nautical miles. But the senior police officer at Wyala knew better. He interpreted as 4 to 5 kilometres. And so the airborne survey was focused up there when the aircraft impacted the Gulf with great force. The single entry door on the Cessna 206 was on the left adjacent to the pilot, and he did not release the door before impact, which jammed the door shut. On his descent, the young pilot feared he would be drowned and released his seatbelt before impact. The severe forces injured him at the upper part of the body, and in the meantime, the uninjured operator who tightened his seatbelt managed to extricate himself through the shattered windscreen, because bearing in mind the left door was the only way he could get into the aircraft. There was double doors at the back right, but you couldn't get down there with the aircraft sinking in the water. Both wearing life jackets, they started to swim to the shore, the 12 kilometres. Unfortunately, the operator had to leave the pilot to swim to get help. And when the pilot was finally located, he had died. Had the authorities interpreted the location correctly, they both would have been saved, since there were multiple aircraft available and the search and the weather was fine at the time. One joyful experience occurred in 1994. I just got married and I hastened to the UK to join with the World Geoscience pilot ferrying a Cessna 404 to Botswana to search for diamonds. I met up with the pilot, Jeffrey Ibbotson, the gentleman on the right. The gentleman on the left is Kim Parker, who was our chief pilot. I met up with Jeffrey Ibbotson in Bristol. He just completed a sedimentary air survey of Scotland and Norway and out of Wick. We were tasked with ferrying the Cessna to Botswana, Africa. How much excitement can I contain? The leads to Casablanca and Mali, from Bristol to Casablanca, to Mali, to Libreville, and then Angola. The Cessna 404 was fitted with 3 200-litre extended range fuel tanks on board, but then the plan went pear-shaped. We got into Libreville in Gabon, and we could not get clearance to cross Angola. And the Unitas rebels had a quaint habit of shooting down aircraft that flew across there, and we didn't want to be a trophy on their wall. So we tried repeatedly for about 4 days to get a clearance to cross Angola, and we couldn't get it. We had to get there to maintain the contract, or it would have been a force majeure. We would have lost out on the contract. So being Jeffrey and I were the only ones there to make the decisions, I'm now ashamed to admit, as a safety officer, I did something I shouldn't have done. We didn't have enough range to fly around the coast from Libreville in Gabon around into Namibia. So I went and bought 7 jerry cans full of fuel and put them in the back of the aircraft, and we flew around the coast, and as we were flying there, we were siphoning fuel into the jerry cans to extend the range. I'm ashamed to admit, and I see the cast of men that I used to work with up there. If they'd known it, they would have taken my guts regardless, but anyhow. I'm now ashamed to admit that as a safety officer in isolation, I elected to do that. But we got to Namibia and managed to get into Botswana. Another adventure unfolded for me in Ndola, in Upper Zambia. And that's clearing the strip. The grass had grown and we had to go and clear it before we could take off. The Skyvan was carrying out an airborne electromagnetic survey, towing a fiberglass bird about 30 or 40 metres above the ground in search of minerals. The fuel purchased was in sealed drums, supposedly pure in condition, but was heavily contaminated with water, which is poison to a turbine engine. While on line at low altitude, one engine flamed out, it quit, and the engine sank dramatically. The pilot immediately commanded the operator to reel in the fiberglass bird with all the electronic measuring equipment, but he was advised the bird was lost. I returned to Zambia a few weeks later to recover the aircraft and return to Lusaka. When we arrived, the aircraft guard advised us that the bird had been found intact. What appears, the bird descended into a maize crop and created drag on the weak link, which broke, and the bird was ripped off. The story continues like the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy, when a little boy found the bird, an intact bird, and commenced dragging it back to the village, and where a bigger boy found it and said, "I'll have that." And he took it off him. A family dispute followed, and the little boy's family won the dispute. We arrived at the village in a hire car, they'd go anywhere, and paid the ransom in kwaches. That's the currency of Zambia. And the biggest note in Zambia was 500 kwaches. And all the currency there is absolutely filthy. And so you get a stack about this high of the kwaches. We had to pay the ransom to get the bird back. We managed to get it back and it flew again. We, the operators, constantly being harassed by mining companies, insisting on pilots flying lower and lower to get more improved results. As the headlines of the opening page Petroleum Gazette proclaimed, "Exploration reaches new heights by flying low." As a safety officer and responsible for the crew safety, I was involved in a number of, in my opinion, risky flight profiles. As a safety officer, we were involved with a number of operations which I thought were risky. We were operating a Llama helicopter on a magnetic survey, in Garantalo in Sulawesi, and the mining company wanted us to go lower and lower over the jungle in undulating terms. I flew the site, stayed for a week in the jungle camp, and took the opportunity to fly on survey as the pilot demonstrated the survey height virtually through the treetops, and they wanted us to go lower. That's taken out of the helicopter window as we flew past, and that's going along on survey line. I objected vigorously, and were allowed to continue the contracted survey altitude. Sad to say, the pilot was highly experienced in a later contract over exacting terrain and to conditions. He excelled on the difficult terrain. He was going on his holidays, and they said, look, we've got just a few kilometres on the flats down here near town, would you do that? And he said, yeah, no trouble. And there was the power line there. And he flew over the power line 30 times, and the 31st time he hit it, and it killed him. And as we said, complacency is the bearer of many accidents in this case. He flew at a high potential power line over which he'd flown many times a day and was killed along with his operator. World Geoscience were very proactive in safety, and they had contracted a Learjet medical evacuation company to fly out into remote regions if an employee was injured. And this led to an incident that caused me a night of anguish. I received a garbled phone call at midnight here in Perth on a very noisy phone line from a man who could only sort of Learjet. I'll call you in the morning. I thought, oh, that's wonderful. I knew we had an employee, Simon Shaw, who had been a flamboyant ex-submarine captain. He used to set up operations in difficult areas, whom I believe was somewhere in the Central African Republic. Great, you call me in the morning. Whose morning? Mine or his, which was 7 hours later? I called our London office to see if they knew where he was. They weren't aware of Simon's position. I then called Johannesburg office, and they alerted them to the possibility of medical emergency, and they were able to scramble somewhere to Simon's hotel, where he had collapsed from a malaria attack. A Learjet was scrambled, and he was medevaced out to the hospital in Cape Town for a satisfactory result. All in all, I was very fortunate to be employed by World Geoscience for the 5 years before the downturn in the mining exploration and the salient factors brought about their demise. A sad day for World Geoscience and the staff. We had enjoyed a roller coaster ride for many years, and there was a great deal of research and development and innovation for the company over those exciting years. And I, for one, really did appreciate my involvement and the travel to these hostile zones. I would not have missed the adventure for quids. Thank you, gentlemen.